Welcome to another edition of Inside Your Miami Medicine. I'm your host, Henry Ford, the Dean and Chief Academic Officer of the University of Miami Middle School of Medicine. Today, we're delving into the impact of microplastics and environmental toxins on the human body. Specifically, we want to know whether they can contribute to neurodegenerative disorders such as Alzheimer's, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, also known as ALS, Parkinson's, and so much more. To discuss this fascinating topic, I'm delighted to welcome to the studio Dr. David Davis, Research Associate Professor of Neurology and Associate Director of the Brain Endowment Bank at the Middle School of Medicine. Among Dr. Davis's many accolades and sources of recognition, you should know that he recently starred in a PBS documentary to discuss the same topic that we're about to tackle. The film won a 2023 Suncoast Emmy and was accepted into the prestigious 2024 Santa Fe Film Festival. So we have a celebrity with us today. So Dr. Davis, welcome.
Thank you, Dean Ford. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Well, now before we actually get into the substance of our podcast, please tell the audience a little bit about your journey and what got you to where you are today. How did you manage to become the Research Associate Professor and Associate Director of the Brain Bank?
Well, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and I grew up in an industrial city. And I remember growing up and waking up to smell chemicals in the air on the way to school. And you know, my mother always told me, just cover your nose, cover your mouth, right? And seeing people, living in a big city, a lot of people get sick, and you always kind of think, maybe something in the air is causing it. So, I had a really interest in how environment affects our body from really an early age, and I went to do my undergraduate studies at the University of Michigan, where I looked at environmental microbes and how they interact with humans to kind of regulate some of these things. Some of these things like cyanobacteria, which are primary producers in our environment. So they help produce oxygen and things like that. So it was really a kind of a step-by-step process.
So you're telling me that going to school as a youngster, smelling whether it's pollution or whatever was in the air, generated this interest in you to further explore what was causing all of this when you got to college.
That's true. That's looking at.
It must have been some strong smell.
Yeah, I mean, growing up along, and I grew up really close proximity to the Chrysler Endowment plant. And what people understand about, these plants, they have smaller plants around them that supply parts. So a lot of industry and, just seeing, people who worked at these plants, having poor health issues. And it always stimulated me to say, what are these things that we are producing in our environment that could affect us?
So you surmise that these plants were generating some polluting substances that may be affecting the health of the workers.
Yeah, basically pollutants in the air, things like, small particles probably from production. A lot of stuff goes into making car parts. And I knew a couple people who, anecdotally said, okay, I worked here, I got sick. So that kind of stimulated me to do something to study to help.
And how did you come to focus specifically on cyanobacterial blooms? And what are those? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
So that's interesting. So, we jump from plants to blooms, but cyanobacterial blooms basically occur when a lot of nutrients are released into the water. And these usually come from, could be fertilizer runoff or any type of industrial kind of waste that goes in or sewage. These make these microorganisms that are in our water that are generally beneficial for the ecosystem overgrow. And what happens is they really form kind of like a slime, right? And depending on the color, you can almost predict what type of toxins they produce. And they produce these toxins to kind of gain a foothold in the environment. So, I went into my undergraduate studies and I kind of shifted towards that because it was a close link between industry and in the environment. So I said, well, this is really interesting, So, I think, growing up in Detroit, adjacent to a lot of fresh water, which cyanobacterial blooms generally happen, and you can see really great examples of that in like Lake Erie, one of the Great Lakes. They have massive blooms.
And what's the potential adverse consequence?
So, on the ecosystem, these blooms, they basically, they suck all the nutrients out of the water. So they kill fish. They impact the environment by, if there's any type of tourism or any type of activity in the water, you have to avoid it because generally the smell of these blooms are so bad, because the toxins are aerosolized. For the human perspective, which is really interesting, these molecules released from these cyanobacteria can cause a wide array of health effects. So one of the big one is non-alcoholic liver cancer. So there's a toxin called microcystin that primarily targets our liver. And so we normally see a lot of that along that area in South Michigan and Ohio along Lake Erie. So that kind of drove me into looking at cyanobacteria because there's a direct human issue that I could study looking at cyanobacteria.
So great. Now, how did you end up shifting from focusing on this approach initially, and you talked about the impact on liver disease, liver cancer for that matter, to studying neuropathologies?
So
The shift to the brain.
Yeah, that was actually a big jump. So I started working at Wayne State University in a cancer pathology lab. I was doing an internship there, and I met a pathologist there, and his perspective on just the way he approached research problems just amazed me. So I really got this deep interest in pathology. So I was already looking at liver disease. So I started looking at, aspects of liver pathology, and the brain was just, I don't know, just something that clicked. And there was no really one defining moment. I can recall reading something about how liver failure affects the brain, and it just shifted me towards that. And I think that's kind of really grew when I got into my graduate studies.
Once you got into the brain, you got hooked.
Yeah, I mean, if people say that's the last frontier, I don't know if that's true, but
probably the first and last.
So, it was complicating, a very complicated organ, and it just kind of fascinated me. So drove me in.
Yeah, tell me, man. You started out with pollutants, and then you shifted ultimately to the study of microplastics. Where did that come from?
So, microplastics was something I really never thought about doing research on.
So how did you get to study nanoplastics and its impact on health?
So I was mainly focused on things that were produced from industry, how they affected really water and how water affected us. And one of the things that kept coming up is the amount of plastic or microplastics that are in water. So you'll see these really
where did it come from?
From the factories, right? So so you'll see these really really convincing pictures of turtles with tons and tons of microplastics in their stomach that passed. And I think that's more of a recent thing that people are showing that's really convincing. But for me, just looking at the amount of plastic in water, and not what we see, but the microplastics. So I was actually fortunate enough to be approached by another researcher who I'm collaborating with at the Arizona State University, and they kind of pitched this idea to me. It says, well, you're looking at cyanotoxins in the water. Can you look at microplastics?
Because they are so abundant in the water.
Yes, so that kind of drove me in, and it's been a learning curve because I had to really shift how I view
First of all,
exposures.
how do you detect microplastics in the water or in any species?
So you can use any technique, any standard technique, depending on the size of the microplastic. People generally use techniques to separate it by size and look at its structure. So chromatography and mass spec. If they're big enough, you can see them under the microscope. I think the concern we have in our lab are the ones you can't really see, so the nano-sized ones.
And I imagine the amount of these pollutants is increasing.
Yes. So in 2022, there was about 400 million metric tons of plastic produced, and that's expected to almost be 4 times, so around 1,600 in 2050. So that's right now it's almost unsustainable, and you can hear stories of remote places where there's no one on the beach, and you go and there's just plastic everywhere, and then you clean it up and there's more plastic because it's just so much plastic in the water.
So it's just being washed on the shore.
So yeah, it's
So tell us you worried in particular about the nanoparticles derived from those plastics. So how do they impact brain health?
So this is a very important question, because research now is showing that these plastics, so they start out large, they break down over time, they wear, and the smaller they are, it gives them the ability to infiltrate our body. So you'll see studies where people are finding plastic in the heart, plastic in blood vessels.
Stick in the heart. So explain to me how does it get there, and B, how do you detect it?
So the plastics, plastics are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. We eat with them, we wear them, we drink them, and those plastic particles, they get, we ingest them. They can go into our circulation, and depending on their size, they possibly could go and lodge into blood vessels or into other organs.
So you tell me I should not be drinking out of a plastic bottle anymore?
So people now, they've counted the number of microplastics in bottles, but I won't tell people not to drink bottled water, because we don't know the long-term impact. And as a toxicologist, we have to be sure, if because everything is poisonous at some level. But
Understood.
But yeah, you see stories of plastic in unborn fetuses. So the impact on the brain. There are models that show that if your blood-brain barrier, so that's the barrier that protects things from entering the brain, if there's some type of integrity issue with that, the plastic particles probably could go through. So that's been shown in rodent models. In humans, we haven't seen it yet. So we've detected plastic or metabolites of plastic additives in the brain. We plan to publish that study soon.
So somehow it must be getting in.
Right. So we proposed a question of can you inhale it, right? Because there's so much microparticles in the air, and people may be used to seeing dust particles in their house. So those are all probably
fascinating. So that could be one other way for these toxins to get into our body. And so what's the impact on the brain in terms of the diseases that we follow, that we're talking about, neurodegenerative disorders such as Alzheimer's, ALS, and Parkinson's? Do those toxins, those nanoparticles, play a role, do you think?
So, those are all chronic sporadic diseases, and plastics, it's a challenging question we've asked, because when we say plastic, we're talking thousands and thousands of chemicals with different structures, different effects on biological systems. So we believe the right combination of plastics, or let's say bad plastics, could probably, at minimum, cause an inflammatory effect in the brain, probably modulate disease. We know some plastic additives like BPA, which we see on everything, BPA free. We know that affects the endocrine system, which can directly relate to Alzheimer's.
Got it. So now let's talk a little bit about how these nanoparticles, nanoplastics, for lack of a better term, get into our bodies. You alluded to the fact that it's maybe we are inhaling it.
Anyway,
So your work is suggesting that there's a predilection for transport through the olfactory nerve.
that's correct.
Tell us a little bit about that, and because then it goes on to attack some of the neurons and glia, right?
That's correct.
So explain that to us.
So the so the olfactory nerve sits at the front. It's in our nose, right? So
You
we
can
have
tell them what the olfactory nerve is. That's the neuroscientist.
scientists. So we have that nerve has nerve endings that goes into our nasal epithelium, right?
Mm-hmm.
And once a particle can pass that epithelium, it actually has free access to the brain because there's no blood-brain barrier there.
That's the shuttle.
It's a direct route. So one synapse, it goes directly in. And why we look at this is because that olfactory nerve connects through the olfactory pathway regions of the brain that are affected earlier in Alzheimer's disease. So we feel that if particles can get there and they're somehow translocated, that they could play a role in disease. And, one of the earliest signs of Alzheimer's is loss of smell. So that nerve is very important. So we have an hypothesis.
You lose that, you can't smell. So that's, so it could be an overcrowding of that nerve ending. Is that what you surmise?
We think so. So we think if, in other people have shown this with other particles, other toxins, if you damage that nerve, there could be downstream effects on areas of the brain responsible for, learning and memory, or at minimum, cause some type of cognitive impairment.
So given those findings, what are the implications for public health?
So I think the exposure to plastic, either if it's inhaled or ingested, is probably going to be a huge issue because we're basically bombarded with plastic particles now. Mm-hmm. The role it plays in public health, far as the brain, is really emerging, and we know of a couple key molecules that are neurotoxic. But when you say plastics as a whole, it's so many. There's I think of the public health issue in two ways. I think of first the physical pollution that we see that affects our quality of life. This could be waste products here, there. And the second way is the additives of plastic or plastic additives or ingestion of plastic that modifies our system, right? We know in developing individuals or babies, if you expose them to certain plastics that are endocrine disruptors, they'll have issues later on. So, it's a really complicated question.
Let me try to, I guess, rephrase the question. So you're the associate director of the Brain Bank. So you have access to a lot of brain tissue.
Yes, sir.
Can you detect the amount of plastic in the brain, and how does that vary when you look at brains coming from highly industrialized communities where you have a lot of factories and where you expect to have a lot of pollutants? Is there a difference?
So we've only tested a small number because of the issue with contamination, right? So we're actually looking at metabolites now. But the small number that we actually selected individuals who worked in recycling centers, who live near landfills. We see they have pretty high levels. We need to compare that with people who live in more rural areas. And also, let's say
And in that vein, is there a difference in the incidence of, say, neurodegenerative disorders in people who work in those industrial cities compared to those who work in rural areas? Do we know?
So we do know that. We know there's different types. I think more of the industrial areas or more of the rural areas, people believe the neurodegenerative diseases are more due to agricultural exposures.
Different types of toxins.
Right? But, that's a really challenging question because depending on the individual's age and their individual exposure, right? So we know the plastic boom started in the 1950s. So before then, there was not much plastic. Now it's, so if you take someone in their 70s or 80s, what is their level of exposure compared to someone in their 20s? So the film was really nice because they tackled that question using blood. And, the director, Roy Fielding, he tested himself, his daughter, his daughter's daughter, and he also tested his mother. And, because of HIPAA, they couldn't really give out the types of particles or concentrations, but, they were saying that generally the youngest person was the most affected, right?
Because there's a preponderance of these toxins now.
So we have a really tough research questions to ask, but we do feel that people who live in industrial cities who have more access to plastic or and live in more close proximity to landfills, things, or industrial places probably will have a greater exposure.
And then that's part of the research you're conducting now and hope to prove unequivocally.
Yeah, so we're focusing on right now commodity plastics, which are plastics with low melting temperatures. And these are things we use every day, like, not paper plates, but, disposable forks, knives, plastic wrappings, egg containers, so styrofoam.
So this will be important in terms of making the environments and those communities even safer if we can intervene to limit some of those toxins in the air.
That's correct. I mean, my vision is to kind of pick out the bad plastics. You can't have a world without plastics at this point. And we've had a lot of great advances, medicine, and engineering with plastics. But I do feel that there are plastics that we have in our environment that we can do without. And I'd say styrofoam is probably one of them.
Good. In our remaining few minutes, tell me a little bit about algae blooms and their potential as well as neurotoxins.
So the algae, so cyanobacteria and algae bloom field is pretty well established. I was fortunate enough when I came to the university in 2013 to be given a project looking at the effect of a particular algal toxin called BMAA, which has been shown to cause ALS type pathology when ingested in high amounts. Why that's important is because, as you know, Florida has a lot of algal blooms, and right. This time of year, everyone's nose is a little itchy, everyone's respiratory tract's a little, and I think a lot of people think it's cold, but a lot of it's cyanobacteria in the air or toxins in the air. So
was there some overgrowth in recent years that was reported? Just pre-pandemic, I seem to recall.
So there's been a couple mega blooms. Generally, the one people focus on is Lake Okeechobee. That's a really good model of nutrient pollution. So industrial runoff. The Indian River is another one. So
what's the implication for health?
So these blooms are really, really nasty. They produce a lot of toxins. I mean, really potent toxins. Toxins that could be used actually as, biological weapons. They're that strong.
Wow.
So, you have saxitoxins that are, that have a lethal dose of like 1 mg per kg, a very small amount, so you have a lot of people living on these coastal areas or adjacent to lakes that have a lot of cancers, a lot of liver disease. We believe a lot of neurological issues too.
So what do we do about it, knowing all the facts about their connection to diseases?
So the exposure to algal bloom is actually is very difficult because there's a lot of testing in drinking water, but you can't test for every type of toxin. I think the state of Florida has been really good at telling people to avoid areas with with active blooms. I would tell people to avoid them, to test your water. If the water doesn't look blue or dark blue, don't swim in it. If it's brown, green, or red, stay away from it. And if you live near an area with blooms, you can wear just a surgical mask. That'll help. But Yeah, limiting consumption of fish that come from those areas too. They bioaccumulate the toxins. And, these things they're not like plastics where they're, on the cutting edge of, we know if you have them, you'll have neurological problems. So,
Wow.
so
This is truly fascinating. I think these are some very, very important practical suggestions that you have made to the audience in terms of how to limit the toxicities related to all of these pollutants and toxins related to algae bloom. So I really, really appreciate that. This has been most informative. So let me thank you for taking the time to enlighten us the way you have over the past 30 minutes. I think the audience is now better informed, and we'll need to find ways to limit exposure to all of those toxins that may be floating around us, and using the olfactory nerve to get into the brain. So, and thank you for your work with the blood bank and the brain bank, the brain bank, and because this is really shedding a lot of light on some critical issues as far as public health issues.
Thank you.
So,
thank you.
And this has been another episode of Inside UMiami Medicine with the incomparable Dr. David Davis. Join us again for the next episode of Inside UMiami Medicine.